All right. Hello, everyone. It seems that we are live, and very welcome to the first session of today on how to turn your game into a money-making machine with AdMob. I'm Jonas. I work at Google as mobile apps consultant, and I have the pleasure to bring you closer to the topic today and what we have on the agenda. First of all, I'm going to talk a bit about industry trends currently. Second, we're going to cover AdMob ad formats. Third part going to consist of mediation and bidding, and we're going to have a short session of Q&A afterwards, so feel free to drop them in the chat here. I will try to see them and answer them if possible. All right, let's dive right in. Mobile still has the highest growth in the last years in comparison to PC gaming and console. And I mean, this is a very important factor to consider when thinking of in which direction you want to go. So mobile still has like a crucial role in gaming. And let's have a deeper look into the different verticals of this. First of all, non-gaming. Here you can see the non-gaming vertical split up into categories compared between Android versus iOS. And as you can see in this data, there is barely verticals that are not showing a growth. So non-gaming vertical in general is growing. And you can see there are a lot of similar trends, for example, for travels and utilities that show very much growth in revenue year over year and also in downloads. If we break that down a bit deeper into the iOS and compare the growth rate of the different countries, we can see something very interesting at the top right. There are a few countries that are classified with some others as NBU countries, next billion users. For example, Brazil, Colombia, Turkey, and those show that they are growing a lot, even though they are smaller countries than the United States, which are in the red bubble at the bottom left. They still show a higher growth rate in revenue and in downloads than the United States. If we look at the Android side, it brings a similar picture, to be honest. It's also the NBU countries like the Philippines as well that are showing almost 40% growth of revenue in comparison to the United States only being at around 19%. And what I found interesting here is that there are some subsectors that are not growing as much, but it still shows that there's a huge potential in the NBU countries that has not been explored yet. Switching over to gaming. In 2026, 16% of the gaming industry's incremental revenue is expected to come from two regions. That's Middle East, North Africa, MENA, and from Latin America. And I have to say that that's like a very significant number if you consider like the global economy. The country leading this growth is Brazil. In global view, Brazil is the 10th biggest country revenue-wise. And what I observed was the most surprising to me is that half of the US represents the amount of players of Brazil. So Brazil has 102 million players, and the United States has almost like 210 million. And this also shows again that only Brazil has to be considered an important part of your monetization strategy because it is as big. One trend that we observed in the last years is that in-app purchase-heavy publishers starting to implement in-app ads. For example, drawers like board games or chess, they are around at 30 to 40% in ad revenue now. Before, they only had in-app purchase options, and in-app ad-heavy publishers started implementing in-app purchase options. For example, Hypercasual, which were known for only having in-app ads, are now also consisting around 10-15% sometimes out of in-app purchase options. So hybrid monetization becomes more and more important for your games. Let's move on to the second part, AdMob and formats. There are some traditional ad formats like adaptive banners, interstitial ads, rewarded, and native, which you might know, but we also have AdMob formats that are exclusively available for AdMob partners, which are, for example, collapsible banners, rewarded interstitials, and app open. We will go into the formats in a bit. Firstly, app open ads. What are they? App open ads mainly aim to monetize the time your app is loading, where your user anyways is not able to use your app. They take around about 70 to 80% of the loading screen or the splash screen. And as soon as your app loaded, the user can close the ad and continue to your content. This format suits perfectly for apps that are used multiple times per day, for example. There are a lot of benefits from app open ads, and I think the most important one is that you unlock new inventory of time that users were not monetized before. And it maximizes also your demand with the best UX experience, I would say, that is possible, because you don't interrupt your gameplay while using the app. Here you can see an example how the workflow looks like. So in the first screen, you have the home screen. In the second screen, the user opens the app. The third screen is displaying the app open ad with the option to close it on top as soon as you're app loaded. And on the fourth screen, the user is already in your app. With this format, Crazy Labs had the fortune to see 5% uplift in their ARPU by using app open ads. They started using app open ads for 3 of their major games, and through Firebase Remote Config, they rolled out app open ads for the United States and a few other countries. And without having a negative impact on user engagement, they were having 3 to 5% uplift, which is very great considering that their games are very mature already. Moving on to rewarded interstitial ads. You can see a quick example on the right side, but basically the difference between a rewarded interstitial ad and a rewarded ad is that the rewarded ad is triggered by the user, and the rewarded interstitial ad is not necessarily triggered by the user. The user gets a pop-up window, as you can see on the left, where he will be told that in 5 seconds or in 3 seconds, the rewarded interstitial is going to start, and he has to proactively opt out of this format if he doesn't want to see this ad. In the second screen, you can see that there's always an option to close it, but as you can see in the third screen, if the user chooses to not fully watch the ad, he will be warned that there might not be a reward after closing the ad. Through rewarded interstitial, there was Ilion Games who managed to skyrocket their ARPDAU by 80% with this interstitial. They added that format for their Aura shooter game and tested it for 30 days. And they got really great uplifts in impressions and ARPDAU. And also they increased their rewarded video revenue from that by 2.5x. Third format, collapsible banners. You can see on the left side the traditional adaptive banner. It's on the bottom, and on the two other screens in the middle and on the right, you can see the difference to a collapsible banner. Initially, the collapsible banner is moved out to the screen to cover almost up to 50% of the screen, and the user has the option to close the collapsible banner by clicking on the arrow at the top right. One thing that's important about collapsible banners is that they're really easy to implement. If you already have banners implemented in your game, to change to a collapsible banner, it only takes 1 or 2 lines of code. I was recently on an event in Berlin, and a technical colleague of mine was showing live how easy it was. It took him less than 2 minutes to implement the collapsible banner. Second benefit you get from collapsible banners is that your revenue is enhanced. So that means you can have maybe 30 to 50% higher click-through rates because the collapsible banner takes more attention and more screen space of the user. And also the third benefit of collapsible banners is that it's the only option to have an ad format being minimized to a smaller ad. Brelly JSC was implementing collapsible banners, and by doing that, they increased their ARPU by 17%. And not just even that, but they also boosted their eCPMs in their whole banner revenue, in whole banner inventory by 34%. Let's move on to the third and last part, mediation and bidding. Mediation is the easiest way to maximize your revenue, to focus, so you can focus on your app development and increasing and further developing your app features. You get more revenue from the inventory by having real-time CPMs for AdMob and also hybrid monetization with bidding and waterfall, which we are going to touch on in a second as well. And you have a higher control and efficiency through mediation groups, for example, and you can automate CPM updates to have the best ad network optimizations. So how can you maximize the ad revenue from any demand source? This has three parts. Bidding. You can get real-time demand with Google's bidding solution from over 25 networks. The waterfall, which is important for the hybrid setup that I was mentioning just a second ago. You can additionally have bidding sources there in the waterfall networks, and Google Demand. With AdMob mediation, you can get exclusive access to the largest pool of advertisers competing for your inventory. Additionally to the Google Demand, you can access 30 integrated network partners, which you can see on the right here. And this also includes several regional networks. And also, if there are networks that you would like to work with, that you want to implement, but you don't see in those 30 networks, AdMob mediation allows you also to get access to 70 more networks via custom adapters. And the best part is that this is supported for all major ad formats. So AdMob mediation is supporting all formats that are traditional, but also the ones that are exclusively for AdMob mediation. In addition to all this, AdMob also offers easy A/B testing directly within the user interface. You want to make sure that your new mediation setup is optimized for the best performance possible. So I always recommend having A/B tests running and not just switching to a new setup. Because with A/B tests, you can compare the real-time bidding with a traditional waterfall setup as well. This also maximizes the risk of lost revenue when testing on a small percentage of users, because you're not rolling it out to all of your users. You can see it on the right side. With only a few clicks, you can start an A/B test. It takes 3 or 4 clicks to get started, and you get really valuable performance insights comparing the two setups with each other directly over a specific period of time. So thanks so much for taking the time to listen to the insights I had to share, and I'm looking forward to see if there are some questions in the chat. So there was a question from Jamie. Jamie was asking, how do you work with AdMob to test different ad placements for the best user experience? And I think that's a great question, honestly. So what I would say about this is that, first of all, that you utilize AdMob as your mediation. And then with AdMob mediation, you can test different ad placements within your app. So you can set up an A/B test between different formats as well, and comparing, okay, what is the retention if you use this format, for example, interstitial ads, in comparison to if you use rewarded interstitial ads, which are available for AdMob mediation. And then you can compare the retention that you're seeing between the different formats. Let me see for another question. I have a question here from Buford. I hope I was pronounced the name right. Yes, Buford was asking, I'm curious if there are new trends in ad integration, like hybrid monetization, that developers should be aware of. And I mean, it's always important to see what the current trends are. And hybrid monetization is actually a trend that is slowly also becoming rare, because a lot of mediation providers started focusing on bidding only. So this is definitely one of the biggest trends I would consider to see, okay, which mediation provider is offering which options to mediate with them. So this is why we are still offering a hybrid setup, because we think that it makes sense to give the publishers still the options to choose if they want to do bidding only or with a waterfall setup. So this is definitely something I would consider as like the biggest trend right now in ad integration. And one thing that I also observed in the past is especially about format diversity. So it's not enough anymore to have one format or one placement implemented into your ad, because users are much more not resistant but acceptable to ad formats. It is very important that you mix it up. You try app open ads, for example, that you try different formats and different placements to make sure that the users are monetized in the best way. So this is something I would consider also as important trend that I see in the last weeks from a lot of publishers. We have an interesting question from Antonia. Can you explain how do you integrate ads without frustrating players or driving them away? So it touches also on my last question. So thanks for that, Antonia. So first of all, it's important that you don't drive away the players, because it is much more expensive or much more difficult to get new players than retaining the players you already have. So what you want to do is try a conservative approach, first of all, to not overload the users you have with ads. Second of all, to also customize the user experience for different cohorts or segments. Because what some people do is they look globally at their users, and then they have one monetization strategy for all of them, which doesn't make sense, because users in Europe are much more differently reacting to users in the US, for example, or in next billion user countries, or in Asia. So it makes sense to categorize your users in geography, and best case even in payer intent if you are in a purchase related, for example. So if the user is watching rewarded video ads, you don't necessarily need to give them interstitial ads. But if you have users that are not paying in your app, they are not watching rewarded ads, then you know they are not monetized at all. And these users you can target also with interstitial ads. And if you have retention with those users, if you lose retention with those users, it doesn't really matter for your revenue or for your game's success financially, because they never contributed to the financial success of your game anyways. All right, we are having a very quick wrap up. I will see if I find another question that's very easy and quick to answer. Okay, we have one question from Raul. Raul is asking, what strategies can developers use to encourage players to engage with rewarded ads? It's a very good question. So what I would say is, first of all, you need to research a bit with strategies that other publishers use as well. So what I would do as a publisher from this perspective, I would research what are my main competitors and use their apps and see what strategies they have for rewarded ads. So I'm not much of a specialist for UX. We have a specific team within Google for that. But what I see is that it makes sense to consider the reward versus the time invested. The user has to see an actual value from the reward that you're offering because they're giving their time to obtain that reward. And I think that's important to consider and to then see what rewards are, for example, the competitors of yours giving, and then adjusting your strategy to that. If I didn't manage to answer your question today, I'm sorry for that. We have an help center, the AdMob Help Center. If you Google AdMob Help Center, you will find a lot of insights into different topics where you can navigate through formats, mediation, bidding, what we talked about today. So feel free to check this out as well. And yes, thanks so much again for taking the time. I hope you have a good rest of the